In the thick jungles of the Pacific during World War II, soldiers often found themselves face to face with the enemy. And in those moments, their survival depended on one thing: the weapon in their hand. It wasn't the roar of tanks or the scream of fighter planes that decided those close encounters, but the split-second draw of a sidearm. For the Japanese Imperial Army, that weapon was the Nambu pistol, a light, compact, and elegantly designed firearm that, on paper, seemed capable enough. But when the Japanese troops met American forces armed with the M1911A1 .45 caliber pistol, the difference was brutal and undeniable. The battlefield quickly revealed a harsh truth. Japan's sidearm was simply outgunned. The M1911A1 wasn't just another handgun. It was a powerhouse of engineering, forged from the mind of legendary designer John Browning. Chambered in .45 ACP, this pistol fired heavy rounds that packed devastating stopping power. In the hands of US Marines and Army soldiers, it became more than a sidearm. It was a lifeline. When enemies charged through dense foliage or burst from trenches, one pull of the M1911's trigger could end a fight instantly. The deep, thunderous sound of the .45 round became a signature of American firepower. In contrast, the lighter crack of the Japanese Nambu sounded almost fragile, like a warning shot rather than a threat. For the Japanese soldier, the Nambu pistol symbolized national pride, designed and built domestically to reflect Japan's growing industrial power. Yet, its 8mm cartridge lacked the stopping power needed in real combat. Soldiers often complained that even well-aimed shots failed to drop opponents unless they struck vital areas. The pistol's safety mechanism was awkward, and its design, while refined, didn't hold up well to the dirt, humidity, and chaos of battle. It was a weapon that looked good on the belt, but faltered in the mud. Meanwhile, American troops grew confident in their .45. They trusted it to fire when soaked, caked in sand, or dropped in water. The pistol's recoil was strong, but its results were absolute. Stories began spreading across the Pacific. Tales of Japanese officers being stunned at how one shot from the M1911 could end a fight instantly. It wasn't arrogance, it was physics. The sheer energy behind each .45 slug made the difference between survival and defeat. And as the war raged on, the message became clear. In the brutal arena of close combat, America's M1911A1 ruled without question. World War II was a war of extremes, massive fleets, unstoppable tanks, and devastating air raids. But behind all the large-scale destruction, it was also a war of inches. In the steaming jungles of the Pacific, soldiers often fought in suffocating humidity, crawling through thick vines, ambushed in the dark by enemies only a few meters away. These were not grand battles fought across open fields. They were raw, personal, and terrifyingly close. In this environment, sidearms became tools of survival rather than mere symbols of rank. The difference between life and death often depended on how fast a soldier could draw his pistol, whether it fired when needed, and whether one bullet could end the fight before it truly began. For the Japanese forces, the sidearm most commonly carried into battle was the Nambu Type 14 pistol. It was designed in the early 1900s by Kijiro Nambu, a talented firearms engineer often called the Japanese John Browning. On paper, the Nambu was modern for its time. Lightweight, semi-automatic, with an 8mm cartridge and an 8-round magazine. It looked sleek with its long, thin barrel and sharp lines, almost like a Luger. But beauty does not win battles. Soldiers quickly discovered that the Nambu, though elegant in appearance, lacked the brutal efficiency demanded by the battlefield. Its 8mm round produced low muzzle energy, and its recoil spring design made the slide difficult to operate under stress or with gloved hands. Worse, its safety switch was awkwardly placed, and engaging it often felt like fumbling through a puzzle. In the heat of combat, that delay could be fatal. The Nambu was also vulnerable to environmental conditions. The damp, muddy jungles of New Guinea and the Solomon Islands were unforgiving, and the pistol's exposed parts and thin grip panels often trapped dirt and moisture. Misfires and jams were not uncommon. To make matters worse, Japanese soldiers were not always issued sidearms in great numbers. The Nambu was primarily an officer's weapon, not a standard infantry tool, and ammunition was sometimes scarce. For the men who did rely on it, the pistol became more of a backup than a weapon of confidence. In stark contrast, the American M1911A1 was a beast, first adopted by the US military in 1911 and refined through decades of service. This pistol had already proven itself in World War I. Its heavy steel frame, single-action mechanism, and large .45 ACP cartridge made it one of the most effective handguns ever built. When a US Marine carried it into battle, he knew it would fire no matter what. The weapon could be caked in grime, drenched in seawater, or dropped in the mud, and it would still function. Its 7-round magazine may have seemed small, but each shot carried tremendous force. The .45 caliber bullet was designed for stopping power, capable of putting an enemy down with 1 or 2 hits. That reliability gave American soldiers immense psychological confidence, especially in close combat where hesitation meant death. The Pacific War was full of brutal, up-close fighting. Patrols clashed at night, foxholes turned into hand-to-hand struggles, and sudden ambushes forced men to react within seconds. US troops quickly learned to trust their pistols as much as their rifles. Many veterans recalled that the .45's bark and recoil became symbols of security, the reassuring proof that their weapon could stop an enemy dead in his tracks. Meanwhile, captured Nambus were sometimes examined by American troops, and they were often met with disbelief. Soldiers laughed at their weak recoil and strange design. Some even kept them as souvenirs, not for their effectiveness but as curiosities, a reminder of how overmatched the Japanese pistol truly was. The difference between the two handguns wasn't just mechanical. It reflected two philosophies of warfare. Japan valued precision, craftsmanship, and lightness, while the United States focused on power, practicality, and dependability. On the battlefield, those philosophies collided, and the outcome was obvious. When a Japanese officer drew his Nambu against a Marine's M1911, the result was rarely in doubt. The American pistol spoke with thunder, while the Japanese sidearm whispered. And in the unforgiving noise of war, the louder voice always won. The M1911A1 pistol earned its reputation not in firing ranges or training fields, but in the chaos of real combat. It was designed for one thing: stopping the enemy fast. In the close-quarter battles of the Pacific, where soldiers fought through bunkers, trenches, and dense jungle, that trait made all the difference. The .45 ACP cartridge it fired was large, slow-moving, and carried enormous kinetic energy. When it hit hard. A single well-placed shot could knock a man off his feet, even through thick uniforms or light cover. For American soldiers, it wasn't just a sidearm, it was a symbol of confidence. The final line of defense when their rifles jammed or ran empty. John Browning's design philosophy behind the M1911A1 was simple: build a pistol that would work in any condition. It had few moving parts, an easy field strip system, and a grip angle that made it natural to aim quickly. Its recoil was heavy but manageable for trained soldiers. The slide and barrel were built thick and strong, giving it a sense of indestructibility. Even after hundreds of rounds, the weapon rarely malfunctioned. During the war, soldiers discovered it could be soaked in salt water, dropped in sand, or coated in grime and still fire without hesitation. That kind of reliability turned the M1911A1 into something soldiers trusted with their lives. Meanwhile, the Japanese Nambu pistols were beginning to show their flaws in battle. The most common version, the Type 14, was underpowered and fragile compared to the American weapon. It fired the 8.22mm Nambu round, which was far weaker than the .45 ACP. The difference in stopping power was staggering. The .45 round delivered over 350 foot-pounds of energy, while the Nambu's bullet produced less than half of that. This meant that in close combat, even direct hits from the Nambu often failed to immediately incapacitate an opponent. American soldiers wearing thick clothing or web gear could sometimes keep fighting after being shot. In the same situation, a single .45 round from the M1911 ended the fight instantly. The design of the Nambu also reflected a different kind of thinking. It was built for officers, not frontline grunts. Its lightweight frame and minimal recoil made it comfortable to shoot on a range. But those advantages disappeared in the mud and chaos of real combat. The trigger pull was stiff, the safety awkward, and the grip angle unnatural. To make matters worse, the magazine spring was weak, which often caused feeding failures. In some cases, The magazine release mechanism was so loose that magazines could fall out during movement. It was a pistol designed for parade fields, not battlefields. For the men who carried the M1911A1, every feature served a purpose. The large grip fit solidly in a soldier's hand. The heavy slide made each shot feel deliberate and controlled. The crisp single-action trigger gave a clean break, allowing precise shots under pressure. Soldiers spoke of how the gun felt right, like an extension of their body. When ambushed or cornered, they didn't have time to think. Their hand went straight to the pistol and muscle memory took over. The M1911's powerful bark became a familiar sound on Pacific islands like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, a reminder of American firepower echoing through palm forests and bunkers. For the Japanese, the situation was different. As the war dragged on, material shortages affected weapon quality. Late-war Nambu pistols were poorly made, with rough machining, weak springs, and brittle parts. Reports from the field described cracked slides and misfires that left soldiers defenseless in life-or-death moments. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. While American pistols were mass-produced to the highest standards, Japanese weapons declined as resources ran thin. On the front lines, experience taught harsh lessons. American soldiers who picked up enemy Nambus after firefights often remarked how toy-like they felt compared to their own sidearms. Some tried firing them out of curiosity and found the recoil gentle but unimpressive. Others called them unreliable junk. The Japanese had entered the war believing their craftsmanship and design precision would carry them through. But on the ground, brute force and rugged practicality proved superior. By 1943, the difference between the two pistols had become legendary among troops. The M1911A1 was not only respected, but feared by the enemy. It was a weapon that demanded respect each time it was drawn. The Nambu, meanwhile, became a symbol of Japan's struggle to match the raw industrial and tactical might of the United States. Each encounter between these two, sidearms told the same story, one of overwhelming American firepower meeting Japanese design that simply couldn't keep up with the brutal demands of modern warfare as the Pacific Campaign intensified. The contrast between America's M1911A1 and Japan's Nambu pistol became more than just a technical difference. It became a reflection of two nations' philosophies of war. The Americans built for power and reliability, while the Japanese clung to precision and discipline. Yet on the battlefield, where mud, fear, and chaos ruled, it was the weapon that could endure punishment and still fire that truly mattered. The M1911A1 thrived in those conditions. Marines crawling through swamps or bursting into enemy trenches found that their pistols worked every single time they pulled the trigger. In a world where seconds decided survival, that kind of dependability was priceless. Reports from the front lines spoke of brutal close-range encounters where rifles were too long and cumbersome to use effectively. Soldiers clearing bunkers or raiding enemy foxholes relied entirely on their sidearms. Many veterans described how the heavy thud of the .45 round felt like reassurance, a reminder that their weapon would do its job. Even in complete darkness, they trusted its grip, its feel, and its thunderous power. It was a pistol that had character. Soldiers often personified it, calling it their last friend or old reliable. It wasn't sleek or elegant, but it didn't need to be. Its strength lay in its simplicity and its unmistakable punch. For Japanese troops, the experience was vastly different. The Nambu pistol, though a symbol of officer rank and pride, often betrayed its users in combat. Stories spread among American soldiers that Japanese officers would fire multiple shots before their targets even realized they'd been hit. The 8mm round simply didn't have the stopping force to end a fight quickly. In close combat, that hesitation could mean death. American veterans recounted moments where they were hit by the Nambu, but kept moving forward, their adrenaline carrying them through the weak impact. They fired back with the .45, and the fight was over in 1 or 2 shots. It wasn't just a difference in design, it was a difference in consequence. One of the biggest flaws of the Nambu was its safety system. The lever, positioned awkwardly on the side, required 2 hands to operate smoothly. Soldiers under stress found it clumsy and slow. Worse yet, the Type 94 model had a notorious design defect, a small exposed sear bar on the side of the pistol. A light press on that area could discharge the weapon, even if the trigger wasn't touched. In the unpredictable tension of war, such flaws were deadly. Some Japanese soldiers reportedly avoided carrying their pistols, with a round chambered out of fear of accidental discharge, effectively handicapping themselves in moments when speed was critical. Meanwhile, American manufacturing turned the M1911A1 into a legend. Every piece was precision machined to military standards, and replacement parts fit seamlessly from one pistol to another. Soldiers in the field could strip and reassemble the gun in minutes, even blindfolded. It required minimal maintenance, and its solid steel frame absorbed recoil effectively. The weapon was balanced, heavy enough to stay steady, light enough to handle quickly. It fired with a satisfying recoil that kicked but never punished. Many soldiers grew so familiar with its rhythm that they could reload and fire instinctively. It wasn't just a tool. It was a part of their identity. The difference in ammunition also played a massive role. The .45 ACP cartridge was designed specifically for stopping power after American experiences in earlier conflicts like the Philippine-American War, where smaller calibers failed to stop charging adversaries. That lesson was not forgotten. Each .45 round carried immense force designed to neutralize an enemy immediately. Japan's 8mm Nambu cartridge, by contrast, was based on earlier European pistol rounds meant for controlled environments, not the brutal close-quarters jungle warfare of the Pacific. The result was predictable. When both pistols were drawn, the M1911A1 consistently proved superior in range, impact, and reliability. In every sense, the M1911A1 embodied the American approach to war: build strong, trust simple, and make it work under any condition. The Nambu, with its delicate mechanics and weaker firepower, represented a different ideal, one that simply couldn't survive the raw, unrelenting nature of modern combat. On the islands of the Pacific, where survival depended on strength and endurance, the American pistol didn't just outperform the Japanese, it defined what it meant to hold the upper hand in a fight where every pull of the trigger counted. The difference between the M1911A1 and the Nambu wasn't just mechanical, it symbolized the deeper contrast between the two armies facing off across the Pacific. American soldiers were equipped with weapons built to endure anything. Japanese soldiers, on the other hand, carried firearms designed for tradition and discipline rather than adaptability. The M1911A1 was born out of America's industrial power, a weapon refined through decades of testing, feedback, and real-world experience. It was meant for the everyday soldier, reliable in every circumstance. The Nambu, however, felt like a weapon designed more for ceremony than survival. It was elegant and lightweight, but elegance doesn't save lives in the middle of a jungle ambush. By 1943, the brutal lessons of the Pacific War made the difference clear. In places like Guadalcanal, Bougainville, and Tarawa, the combat was so close that soldiers could smell the gunpowder and feel the heat of their enemy's breath. Pistols became lifelines. American Marines clearing bunkers relied heavily on their .45s. When their rifles ran dry, the pistol was what finished the job. Japanese troops often tried to fight with bayonets or grenades, but when it came to pistols, their options were limited. The Nambu's weak round and unreliable firing mechanism left them at a clear disadvantage. In close encounters, that difference often determined who walked away alive. The sound of battle told its own story. The M1911A1's deep, booming report echoed through palm forests and shattered the night silence. It was unmistakable, a single shot that carried authority. The Nambu, in contrast, gave off a softer, almost metallic crack. Soldiers on both sides could tell instantly who was shooting. American troops described how that distinct sound boosted their morale. They knew their weapon spoke louder, both literally and figuratively. Even Japanese soldiers who survived engagements with American forces admitted after the war that the .45's impact was terrifying. Its sheer force was enough to drop a man instantly, even if the shot didn't strike a vital organ. The Nambu's bullets simply couldn't compare. The design of each weapon reflected its origin. The M1911A1 had a heavy, solid steel frame. Its controls were large and easy to operate, even with dirty or gloved hands. It was built for simplicity, which made it forgiving under stress. The Nambu, however, had small, fiddly controls and a long, spongy trigger pull that made accurate shooting difficult in tense moments. Its grip angle was awkward, forcing the shooter's wrist into an unnatural position. Japanese officers who trained extensively could manage it, but for soldiers in the field, that design flaw made all the difference. Many complained that it pointed high and was hard to aim quickly, critical weaknesses in fast-moving jungle fights. Another major factor was psychology. American soldiers trusted their pistols completely. That trust bred confidence, and confidence in combat is power. They knew that if their M1 Garand jammed or they ran out of ammunition, their 45 would not fail them. The Japanese, on the other hand, often viewed their pistols as secondary or even symbolic weapons. They were tools of authority, not instruments of survival. Officers carried them as marks of rank, and enlisted men relied more on rifles or bayonets. This mindset further widened the performance gap. When an American drew his M1911A1, it was with the full intent to survive. When a Japanese officer drew his Nambu, it was often a gesture of defiance more than confidence. As the war dragged on, Japan's production quality declined sharply. Factories faced shortages of steel, skilled labor, and precision tools. Later Nambu pistols were crudely made, with rough machining and loose tolerances. Misfires became more common, and replacement parts were inconsistent. The M1911A1, in contrast, was produced in vast numbers across American industries, each weapon meeting strict military standards. The United States had the luxury of mass production without sacrificing quality, and that advantage extended beyond pistols. It was the foundation of their entire war effort. By the time the Allies began their final offensives across the Pacific, the legend of the M1911A1 had already spread. It was no longer just a sidearm. It was a symbol of American reliability, strength, and determination. The Nambu, meanwhile, became a curiosity among Allied soldiers, something to examine, compare, and even mock. The two pistols stood as metaphors for their nations, one built for endurance and brute force, the other crafted for precision but weakened by fragility. In the unforgiving test of war, only one philosophy survived, and it came wrapped in steel, oil, and the unmistakable echo of a 45 round cutting through the humid Pacific air. By 1944, the tide of the Pacific War had turned decisively against Japan. The American war machine was in full force, and with it came weapons that had been tested, perfected, and trusted. Among them, the M1911A1 continued to earn its reputation as one of the most effective sidearms ever created. It wasn't just soldiers who respected it. It was admired by anyone who understood the brutal demands of combat. Meanwhile, the Japanese forces were facing increasing shortages of everything, from ammunition to steel. Their weapons, including the Nambu pistol, began to show the wear of desperation. The difference between these two pistols became more than technical. It became symbolic of the contrasting conditions, mindsets, and outcomes of the two nations at war. As American troops advanced island by island, they often recovered Nambu pistols from captured or fallen Japanese officers. At first glance, the Nambu looked refined and modern. It had smooth contours, a clean finish, and a distinctive silhouette. But when GIs tried firing it, they were often disappointed. The weapon's trigger was heavy, the recoil weak, and its accuracy inconsistent. Many were shocked by how underpowered it felt compared to their M1911A1. The 45 ACP round produced a heavy thump that could stop almost anything in its path, while the Nambu's 8mm bullet felt more like a sharp tap. Veterans joked that the Nambu seemed better suited for shooting paper than people. That difference wasn't just anecdotal, it was measurable. The 45 ACP round carried roughly twice the stopping energy of the Nambu's cartridge. In battle, that margin was everything. The M1911A1 was built around the principle of reliability in chaos. American designers knew war wouldn't be fought in clean conditions. Sand, rain, sweat, and blood would all find their way into the weapon's crevices, and yet the gun had to fire every time the trigger was pulled, and it did. Reports from the Pacific were filled with accounts of soldiers who had dragged their M1911s through mud, dropped them in salt water, or used them in torrential rain, only to find the weapon still firing flawlessly. That kind of trust gave the weapon a legendary status. Soldiers said they could bet their life on their 45, and many did. The Nambu, meanwhile, was infamous for jamming and for its overly complicated safety lever, located awkwardly on the frame. In high-stress moments, it was a fatal flaw. Some Japanese soldiers even preferred to discard the pistol entirely, and rely on their rifles or grenades instead. American soldiers also noticed how dangerous the Nambu could be, but not to the enemy. Early models had a poorly designed firing pin spring, and if dropped, the pistol could discharge accidentally. There were stories of Japanese officers unintentionally shooting themselves while drawing the weapon. The M1911A1, in contrast, had a grip safety and thumb safety that prevented such mishaps without slowing down its use. It was a simple, smart design that balanced power and control perfectly. Every feature of the M1911 had a purpose, while the Nambu often felt like it was designed by engineers who had never fought a battle themselves. On the psychological side, the difference was profound. The M1911A1 gave American troops a sense of dominance in close-quarters combat. They knew that even if outnumbered, their sidearm could level the field. In countless encounters, Marines described how one well-placed .45 round could stop a charging enemy instantly. The Nambu lacked that intimidating effect. Even when fired, its lighter report and smaller impact didn't inspire fear or respect. Japanese soldiers, disciplined and courageous as they were, couldn't rely on their pistols the same way. In their culture, the sword, not the sidearm, was the weapon of honor. This deep-rooted tradition influenced weapon design itself. The Nambu was treated almost as an accessory to an officer's uniform, rather than a critical instrument of battle. As the war neared its end, American troops collected Nambu pistols as souvenirs. Many brought them home, fascinated by their design despite their flaws. Some gunsmiths even studied them, noting the fine machining of early models, but also the shortcuts taken in later ones. By 1945, Japan's factories were barely functioning, and their weapons reflected that collapse: crude finishes, mismatched parts, and unreliable mechanisms. The M1911A1, on the other hand, was still rolling off American assembly lines with precision and consistency. It symbolized the difference between a nation straining to survive and one surging forward with unstoppable momentum. In the final months of the war, when the fighting grew fiercest and more personal than ever, the M1911A1 continued to prove itself as the ultimate soldier's companion. It was the weapon of last resort that never failed. For those who carried it, it wasn't just a gun. It was a promise that when all else failed, they still had a fighting chance. The Nambu couldn't make the same promise. It was elegant, yes, but elegance meant little in the mud, smoke, and fire of the Pacific. By war's end, the verdict was clear. Japan's Nambu pistol had been outclassed in every way, and America's .45 had earned its place as one of the most feared and respected sidearms in military history. When the war finally reached its most desperate phase in 1945, the differences between the two pistols, the American M1911A1 and the Japanese Nambu, were no longer just a matter of performance. They had become symbols of two vastly different wartime realities. America's sidearm represented power, dependability, and industrial mastery. Japan's pistol, on the other hand, reflected a nation stretched thin, holding on to tradition while its war machine crumbled. The men who used these weapons felt that difference in every encounter, in every foxhole, and in every last stand fought across the Pacific Islands. The M1911A1 had by then become a trusted extension of the American soldier's body. It was no longer just a piece of issued equipment. It was a companion. Marines and soldiers spoke about it with affection and pride. It had saved lives in close-quarter fights on Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and countless smaller islands where combat was so intimate that rifles became useless. When the Japanese attacked with bayonets or attempted suicide charges, the heavy .45 came into play. In those terrifying seconds when everything depended on a single shot, the M1911A1 rarely failed. Its bark was loud, its recoil sharp, and its impact devastating. Veterans recalled how even the sound of it, deep and powerful, instilled confidence. That sound meant safety. That sound meant survival. Japanese soldiers, meanwhile, had lost faith in their Nambu pistols long before the final battles. They knew the weapon was underpowered, unreliable, and dangerous to handle. Its ammunition was scarce and inconsistent. Some units even melted down parts of their Nambus to salvage metal for other weapons. Officers carried them mostly out of duty, not confidence. By that point in the war, the Nambu had become more of a symbol of rank than a tool of combat. Japanese soldiers placed their trust in rifles, machine guns, or grenades instead. In close fights, when they reached for their pistols, It was often as a last act of defiance, rather than a hope of victory. The weapon that had once represented national pride now reflected the Empire's fading strength. American soldiers who captured Nambus often found them to be strange curiosities. They admired the craftsmanship of early models, but laughed at the flaws of later ones. Many were amazed at how weak the 8mm round felt compared to the punch of the .45 ACP. Some soldiers even tested the difference themselves, lining up cans, wood planks, or helmets just to compare. The .45 tore through them with ease, while the Nambu's bullet often failed to penetrate deeply. That raw difference in stopping power was a lesson in physics and in the realities of industrial warfare. America's ability to mass-produce powerful, reliable ammunition gave it an edge no enemy could match. Japan, starved of resources, had no such luxury. The M1911A1's design simplicity also meant that soldiers could maintain it anywhere. Stripped down in seconds, cleaned with minimal tools, and reassembled effortlessly, it was a weapon built for survival. The Nambu, however, required careful handling and precise alignment of its parts. If it jammed in the heat of battle, fixing it was nearly impossible. Dirt and grit easily fouled its mechanism, and in tropical jungles where humidity and mud were constant, that flaw could be deadly. American soldiers could drop their .45 in the muck, rinse it with water, wipe it on their sleeve and keep fighting. Japanese officers with Nambus often had to pray their pistol would fire when they needed it most. By the war's closing months, the reputation of both weapons had solidified in the minds of soldiers and historians alike. The M1911A1 was not just a sidearm, it was a legend. It embodied everything the United States represented during that era: industrial strength, innovation, and resilience under pressure. The Nambu, though interesting in design, became a cautionary tale of how poor practicality could doom even a well-intentioned weapon. The Japanese engineers who created it were skilled, but they had prioritized form and national pride over battlefield functionality. The result was a gun that could not stand up to the unforgiving realities of war. After Japan's surrender, many M1911A1 pistols returned home with their owners, kept as cherished mementos of survival. Veterans passed them down to their children, each gun carrying a story of grit and endurance. The Nambu pistols, meanwhile, often ended up as war trophies, displayed on shelves as relics of a defeated enemy. For collectors, they were fascinating examples of wartime design, but for soldiers who had faced them in battle, they were reminders of how much difference a weapon could make when life hung in the balance. The M1911A1's legacy didn't end with World War II. It continued to serve through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, its reputation only growing stronger with time. Even decades later, elite military units and law enforcement agencies still favored it for its raw power and dependability. The Nambu, in contrast, faded into obscurity, remembered mainly by historians and collectors. Its failure was not just mechanical, it was philosophical. It represented a system that valued appearances over practicality and tradition over innovation. In the crucible of war, that approach simply couldn't survive. By the end of the Pacific War, the difference between the two pistols had become a microcosm of the war itself. One nation's engineering, adaptability and determination had outmatched another's rigidity and resource exhaustion. The M1911A1's echo became the sound of victory, while the Nambu's quiet report faded into history, a symbol of a proud empire outgunned by a weapon born of function, power and purpose. When the guns finally fell silent and the smoke of war cleared, the story of the M1911A1 and the Nambu pistol remained etched into the memories of those who fought. These two sidearms had faced each other across countless battlefields, and their fates mirrored the outcomes of the nations that created them. America's M1911A1 emerged from the war not only as a weapon of victory, but as a symbol of technological superiority and practical design. Japan's Nambu, despite its elegant craftsmanship, became a quiet reminder of how pride and tradition could falter against innovation and realism. For the Americans who carried the M1911A1, it became an inseparable part of their identity. Many soldiers credited it for saving their lives in moments when chaos reigned. It had stood firm in mud, rain, and saltwater. It had delivered when rifles jammed and grenades failed. The pistol's rugged steel frame, simple mechanics, and devastating .45 ACP round made it a legend. Its success was not accidental. It was the result of decades of thoughtful engineering and field testing that valued one thing above all: reliability. When the trigger was pulled, it worked. Every time the Nambu, in contrast, told a different story. Designed during a period of growing national confidence, it was meant to showcase Japan's industrial progress and self-sufficiency. But while it looked sophisticated, its flaws were impossible to ignore. Its weak ammunition, awkward ergonomics, and dangerous safety mechanism made it ill-suited for the brutal demands of modern warfare. As Japan's resources dwindled and production standards fell, even its visual refinement disappeared. Late war models were crude, unreliable, and prone to malfunction. The weapon that had once represented pride and precision became a symbol of decline. When American soldiers brought captured Nambus home, they often compared them to their own 45s, with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. The difference in weight, sound, and power was obvious. The M1911A1 felt solid and purposeful. The Nambu felt delicate. That contrast reflected the broader outcome of the war itself. One side had invested in practicality and mass production, while the other had pursued design, philosophy, and tradition, even as its empire burned. Historians later viewed the clash between these two pistols as a lesson in military design. The M1911A1 embodied the core values of survival, simplicity, and raw power. It didn't need to look beautiful. It needed to work when everything else failed. The Nambu, though historically interesting, became an example of what happens when ideology outweighs functionality. Its creators were skilled engineers, but their focus on form and hierarchy blinded them to what soldiers truly needed on the battlefield. In the decades that followed, the M1911A1's legend only grew. It remained in active service for over 70 years, carried by generations of American soldiers, police officers, and civilians. It became a symbol of strength, freedom, and resilience. The Nambu, meanwhile, faded into obscurity, its name remembered mainly in history books and collectors' circles. The story of these two pistols, once fired in anger across the jungles and beaches of the Pacific, became a lasting testament to the simple truth of warfare. The weapon that endures is the one that works when it matters most,